What do your thoughts look like? I bet you no one's ever asked you that question before. When I ask you to think of an apple, what do you see? Do you see a movie of an apple? A picture of one? A drawing? Or maybe nothing at all? I asked my husband this question, and what he told me made me question everything I see in my own head. Hey, I'm Viv, and welcome back to my channel and journey of publishing my first novel, Call of Matter, and series, Aristasis. So where am I at in terms of book development? I am very well underway with my copy edits, which I will talk about in a separate video, my whole process for my edits in publishing my first novel. But I am very much underway, more than halfway done already. I'm on track to hand back my manuscript in September, so which means I'm pacing very well towards my February launch. Right after manuscript is locked comes typesetting, comes layout finalization. Also in terms of cover art, I will have my big cover art reveal. Those of you who have been following me on social media have already been seeing kind of the journey as it's developed, the title treatment / logo, how that was created, and the journey that accompanied that. Then, of course, my series emblem. Of course, I talked about how that ended up, Talix, the emblem ended up on the front cover. You've seen, versions of the title treatment on top of the emblem, but of course, the final cover art is not yet revealed, which I'm very, very looking forward to sharing with all of you. So basically, in terms of timeline, everything is pacing wonderfully towards the February launch. And even more exciting is the second book, which is also underway. I've already finished the first draft. I am, I would say, probably 10% into the second draft at the moment. So that's the kind of headspace I'm in right now. And I wanted to share a really funny and interesting anecdote of what happened to me while I was on vacation a couple of weeks ago. I went on vacation for 2 weeks after I finished my dev edits because it was just so overdue. I really needed it. I wanted to share it because it actually is relevant to my book and me as an author, and there's a point to the story, but I just wanted to share it because it's really quite funny. So as I asked in the beginning of the video, what do your thoughts look like? I'm gonna first talk about when I asked this question for the first time. So I was at dinner, we were on vacation, I was at dinner with my husband, and I asked him, what do your thoughts look like? And he's, I'm sure you can imagine, he just gives me this look. He's like, at this point, like we've been together for 15 years. Like he knows that being with me is like this. Like I'm one of those people where I will be totally in my own world, like head in the clouds all the time. Like all the time. I've talked about in this previous video. My number one favorite activity is like daydreaming. And so my head is just always in the clouds. Like I'm always thinking about something other than what I'm probably actually supposed to be thinking about or what's productive or efficient to think about. I'm like, what do your thoughts look like? He's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, what are you thinking of right now? And he's like, this coding problem I have. So my husband is the Austrian engineer or the automotive engineer that has showed up a couple of times on my social media. He's the automotive engineer, and one of his hobbies is coding. And we were on vacation, and I was kind of like winding down after our beach day before heading out to dinner, like watching the sunset on the terrace. He was just like doing some coding for fun. And I was like, okay, well, what do you think? Like, what are you thinking of right now? And he's like, well, I'm thinking about this coding problem I'm having. I'm like, okay, but what do you see in your head? Because that's a super interesting thing. Like people think words when they think thoughts, but okay, this actually says a lot about what I see in my own head, but I was like, but what do you see? Like, what do they look like in your head, your thoughts? Like not the words, but like, what do you see actually? Which is a whole thing out of itself because, spoiler alert, some people don't see anything at all. And I'm like, okay, so what do you see? You see this error. And he's like, well, I see the error message on my laptop. And I'm like, okay, so you see the pop-up window. Like, this is what I'm envisioning, right? Like, I know what our hotel room looks like. So I'm like thinking, I'm like, okay, he's seeing pop-up error message on his laptop. Like, everything else in the window is blurred out because it's like the pop-up error message is at the front. It's and it's in the center, and I can literally see it. I can see the words. I can see the button where it's like, okay, like close window. And I can see the laptop like sitting on the bed, and there's like fading light coming in from the balcony window. I can like see in the balcony it's like blue hour, right? Like sunset has passed, it's still light out, but like I can like see blue hour, and like the doors closed because we left the room. But I already know that if I were just like to like kick the door, like I can hear the waves from the sea. And then the room, of course, the lights are off because we're not in there, and the room is dimmed. It's like quiet. It's quiet. It's evening. The sun's setting, and it's like this like frozen moment in time. The room's quiet. It's settling down for the night, and it's like waiting for us to return after dinner. But like the laptop's like open, and like the screen's on. Like that's what I see in my head, and that's what I'm thinking when he's saying I see the error message. Like that's what I'm imagining he's seeing. And he goes, no, I just see the words like of the error message. And I was like, okay, so like you just see the pop-up. Like maybe he's like zoomed in, he only sees the pop-up. And he's like, no, I don't see a pop-up at all, I just see the words. And I was like, okay, what? What do you mean you just see the words? Like, I really was like, what do you mean? He's like, I just see words in my head. I'm like floating, like in space. He's like, yeah, like I just see words. Like they're just there. I'm like, is there a background? He's like, what? Like, what do you mean is there a background? They're just words. And it blew my mind. In this moment, I was like, hang on a second. When I say, think of an apple, what do you see? And he thinks for a moment. He's like a drawing. I was really like, what? Like we were in a restaurant. Like I think the people next to us were like, what's wrong with this girl? I was like, what? What do you mean a drawing? You remember automotive engineer. So I'm imagining, I'm like, oh my God, like maybe his head is like totally different from mine. I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, maybe he's got like schematics going on. Like he's got like 3D modeled apple that he can like, he's already calculated the surface area of this apple. Like, I don't know, I'm imagining like graphic, like blueprint. He's like zooming in and out. There's like lasers, like things are calculating. I'm like, maybe this is what his head is like. Like, is this what it's like to be an engineer? And then he goes, I was like, okay, so like drawing, like I'm like describing this to him, like schematic, like what's going on in there? And he's like, no, like a painting. I'm like, what? Like still life? Like fruit bowl type of like painting? And he's like, yes. Like, he's like, it's painted. He's like, it's not like, he's like, it's not real. I don't see, like, he's like, it's like realistic, the painting, like photorealistic painting. But he's like, that's what I see. And I was like, I was speechless. I'm still speechless. Like I'm trying to imagine. Like obviously, when you tell me to think of like a painting, like that's I see it like the kind you see in a museum. I'm like, there's like an apple still life painting. Like the artist is gone, and like maybe there's still like a flutter of a curtain on the side. The apple's like sitting on the countertop, like worn wooden surface. Like I'm trying to think what like maybe it's painted, but it's not like watercolor. I'm thinking it's not oil painting either. It's really like that smooth, almost looks like pencil crayon has colored it in. I don't know, that's what I'm seeing, right, when he says painting of an apple. And then he goes like, Why are you so like shocked by this? Like, what do you see like when you think of an apple? And I'm like, honey, like when you say apple, this is what I see. For me, I'm like instant Macintosh apple. It's like red, but like the top left of it is still a little bit green. And it's sitting on a wooden surface, wooden table. It's sitting, and I can see the orchard in the background, but it's out of focus. I'm like focusing on the apple, and the table is the kind that has a varnish on it, but the varnish has worn down at the corner, like at the edge of the table. The apple's sitting at the edge of the table, and I can see the varnish has worn off on the sides where people have been rubbing against it, where it's just been like weathered over time. And the sun's coming in from this angle. I don't know why in my mind, the sun is often coming in from the left, but it's coming in from the left. And I already know, I'm like reaching for the apple. I'm like, the apple's gonna be warm. It's like sitting out in the sun, but it's like super fresh, and I'm reaching for it. And I can already tell when I reach for it, like the apple, the 4 knobs on the bottom, like one of them is a bit shorter than the other one. So it's like a bit wobbly. I'm like reaching for it. Okay, it's wobbly. And it's also like it's a Macintosh apple. So it's a little bit squat. It's like a smaller one. I already know when I'm reaching for it, I'm like, it's gonna be a bit sour. Like I just know. And I'm like not really looking forward to eating it, but I'm like, okay, it's there. I'm reaching for it, and I'm biting into it. And I'm like, oh, it is warm. But it's super fresh. Like it's really crunchy. It's crispy. It's fresh. Like I can tell it's just been taken off the tree. And I bite into it. It's sour. It's fresh. It's warm. I'm like not really loving it. And I can feel the sensation of the apple juice dribbling down the right side of my face, like where I've like bit into it, and it's like the juice is just coming out a little bit. And I can see and hear in the background, there's like people in the background, like it's like a pick your own apple type of orchard. And I can hear and see people moving about in the background. So that's like one image. And then that thought switches immediately. I'm in the kitchen. I'm like opening the door of the fridge. Like left hand, I can already like feel the hand on, like opening it. Gust of cold air. When I open it, I'm like opening the drawer, the bottom drawer, because the fruit's always in the bottom drawer for us. And I'm reaching, and it's like a Red Delicious. We bought it from the store, so it's been like wax. It's like really shiny. I feel a bit about that for a moment, but I'm like, oh, okay, honestly, like that's just the way it's gonna be. It's Red Delicious. I already know it's gonna be super sweet, super juicy, super crunchy, a bit unnaturally crunchy, and it's gonna be bright red on the outside, and I already know it's gonna be snow white on the inside. And I'm reaching, and it's like the apple's really cold. I already know. I'm like, it's gonna like be not super comfortable when I bite into it because it's gonna be too cold. But like now I'm gonna bite into it, and I bite into it. Explosion. The apple's just a bit too sweet, but I like it. And for me, that's what is playing it in like an instant in my mind when you say apple. Like I literally see that play. They're not like, how should I say it? I'm not building a story. I'm not like, okay, apple, what type of situation is it in? Where would it be? Like I'm not asking in my mind these questions. When you say apple, this is what floods my mind. It's like if you were to say pear now, for me, I'm thinking like I see it already. Like the pear has been sliced. It's been arranged in a concentric circle. It's on the top of a fruit pie. I don't even like fruit pies, but like that's just like the way I see it. Like when you say this word, I have full 4K video, but with multisensory experience playing all at once. And I tell my husband this, and he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And I was like, you mean to tell me it's not like this for you? And he's like, no. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean you just see a painting of an apple? Like, I'm like, do you not see an apple that you could like touch or like look around or like I was like, can you do different angles of the drawing? He's like, no. I have to like actively think that. Like I have to actively be like, okay, what does this apple look like on a counter now? Like, it's an active construction. And I was like, it blew my mind, because obviously I've only ever been in my own thoughts. Like, I assumed everybody else had thoughts like mine. And I bet you watching are also like, whoa, what? Like, I bet you right now you're also thinking, you're like, okay, let me think of an apple. What do I see? Because we all assume that everyone's thoughts look like ours, because like, especially I don't think that we all assume everyone has the same thoughts. I think that's something that's super easy to grasp, that everyone has different thoughts. But most people, I don't know, maybe you guys think more than I do, but for me, I was like, I never thought about like, wait, hold on. Like, what do other people's thoughts look like visually? Like, this is a very different concept. Like, what your thoughts sound like versus what your thoughts look like are completely different things. And I thought everyone's thoughts looked like mine because I've only ever been in my own head. And I just thought people just didn't really think about their thoughts all that much, or like describe their thoughts. But I just thought everyone was having the exact same experience, but they're not, obviously. And this totally blew my mind, because then I had this moment where he was like, is it like this all the time for you? Like, is it every thought? I'm like, every thought, like something super mundane if you think about it, like just like a static fruit. Like, I didn't give any description. It was just like, think of an apple. Has full high fidelity rendering in my mind. And so if you can think about sensory experiences, like I was talking to like one of my best friends about this, and she's like, okay, well, if it's like a sensory experience, like she's like, an apple is like we were talking about this, and she's like, so she sees more than my husband does. She was talking about how she's like, okay, well, I see it on the counter. And she's like it's like there. She's like, it's not like it's like a movie where things are happening, but she's like, it's like there. She's like, I know, like I could reach for it. It's like a real apple. So of course this is like more high fidelity rendering than like a drawing or a painting, where it's like when I asked my dad, I was like, what do you see? So I went and asked like so many people in my life this now, because I was fascinated. I just like open up dinner conversations like, what do your thoughts look like? Like, not like, hey, how are you doing? So what do your thoughts look like? Tell me. This is just what being in Viv's life is like. Like, you just need to prepare yourself for very arresting questions like this. But I asked my dad, and he said he sees a static image. So not a painting. So it's a picture, but there's no background. It's like floating, suspended. Like what my husband said about his error message. He just sees like words suspended. And my dad says he sees apple, like picture of an apple suspended. He can't, it's not three-dimensional. Like, he can't look around it. He can't look behind it. It's like there, static. So obviously it's like a range, right? It's like a spectrum. And okay. So my friend said that that's what she sees. I was like, okay, so it's like a low involvement thought. She's like, yeah, low involvement thought. So she's like, that's all I see. She's like, it's very different if it's like she's like, if you tell me, okay, think about like getting into a bath, right? This is like a much more sensory experience. You think about the water, like how it feels against your skin, like all this kind of stuff. But then she asked the same question as my husband. She's like, is it like this for you for everything? Like all the time? And I'm like, yeah. And she was like, well, isn't that like really tiring? Like, isn't that a lot? I'm like, it's exhausting. Like, it's exhausting. It's like, I only realize now, realizing that other people's heads don't work this way, that like, oh my God, like no wonder, like I'm so overwhelmed sometimes. And here's the craziest thing, okay? So now we get to the part where it like relates to the book and all this kind of stuff. So I, during vacation, fell down the rabbit hole big time about this topic, and I researched it, and apparently there's been extensive research done on this topic. And what I experience, like 4K HD multisensory experience in my thoughts, like imagery wise. Apparently there's a word for this, and it's called hyperphantasia. And apparently the most mind-blowing part of this is that there are people, and it is actually a spectrum. So there's hyperphantasia on one side, which is like intensively vivid imagery. And then the opposite side of the spectrum, which for me is the most mind-blowing of all, is aphantasia. And aphantasia is the people where they cannot conjure any mental imagery. Zero. Like, they know what an apple is, but when you tell them, picture an apple in your mind, nothing comes up. Like, nothing. And for me, I find that incredible. Like, I don't, like, what would that be like? Like, you reach in your, like, you know what it is, but you can't picture it in your mind. This is incredible. Like, this seems almost like contradictory to me. Obviously it's not, because it's real. Like, this is someone's real experience. But I'm like, how can you know what it is, but you can't picture it in your mind? Then how would you know what it is? I find this incredible. I mean, this is obviously why like brilliant scientists have like dedicated their careers, their lives to researching this, because it's so fascinating, because we don't know what it's like to be in other people's heads, right? We can't see other people's thoughts. And so I can't reconcile that in my mind, what that might be like, that it's blank when they think about something like that. Because for me, it's so unblank, and it's so, on my side, it's so involuntary. Like, even if you tell me like, Vivian, like apple, but like don't think of a scene with an apple, I can't. Like, it just happens. My mind is flooding right now with different like various apple imagery and scenes and experiences. Some of them are memories, some of them are like experiences that I've either had with apples, or I could be having with apples. And it's like involuntary, right? Like I can't stop it. I can't force my mind to draw a blank in the way that these people can't force their minds to picture an apple. I can't force my mind to unpicture the apple. I cannot draw a blank. And so I find this so fascinating. I really spent 4 afternoons, like literally like chilling on the beach. I guess, okay, I went swimming sometimes, I went on a walk sometimes, but like a lot of times I was like reading intensively about this, because I found this idea so fascinating. And it also explains, this is the book part now, it also explains so much about how I write and like my entire writing process, how this works. So I've explained in previous videos how my writing process works. First draft is like documentation of what is happening in my mind. So I will give a good example. I mean, I have not publicized these chapters yet. I probably will soon, when I think about, okay, my launch timing, my pre-order timing, etc. But so far, like ungated on my website actually are the prologue and chapter 1. And gated, so if you sign up for my mailing list, you will also have access to an excerpt where you meet my our male hero, our MMC of the the Call of Matter trilogy, which is a part of the 7 planned book series for Aristasis. But Zachary Triton's his name, Zach. You've heard him come up a couple of times in my videos. But you get access to an excerpt where you meet him for the first time in the book, in the series, as a reader, but also, yes, like the first time the protagonist also comes into contact with him. So, but what you will see is that already in the next chapter, you meet one of the main side characters. Anyone who follows me on social media has heard her name come up many times. Her name's Cassidy. And it was actually Cassidy who came to me first. Like, she like just fell into my head. And so like chapter 2 actually is like, that was a transcription. I'm like standing at the sink, like later I'm like transcribing this, like sitting in my study in front of my laptop, but I'm like standing in front of the sink, like completely frozen, arrested by like this scene that's just like playing in 4K in my mind. And I didn't realize it then, but of course I was observing from Tori's perspective. Tori Sabo, who's the protagonist of Call of Matter. And she sees Cassidy. And of course, the scene has gone through many iterations now. I think now I'm on what, like draft? Oh, I'm on draft 5. So in the first draft, I'm sure you can imagine a lot of details have changed, but like the meat of the story is still the same, of the scene is still the same. Like she like sees Cassidy and she's like wondering like what Cassidy's doing. So for me, it was the same thing. Like, oh, like what is she doing, right? This is how the magic system started forming. Like for me, it wasn't actively constructed, the magic system. Like the magic system, I was also an observer. So it was like playing in my mind, and Tori's like seeing her perform these incredible feats of magic. And she's like trying to figure out like, what is she doing? How does this magic system work? Like, what's going on? Who is this woman? At this point, she doesn't know she's Cassidy. None of us do. The readers don't know. And for me, it was the same thing. Like, I didn't know she was Cassidy. I was just like, who is this woman? Like, what is she doing? Where are we? Like, I really like in my mind, I'm like, okay, where are we? Okay, it looks like this. Okay, like matte white walls, like soft light in the background. I'm like writing. Like at this point, like later on the Sunday morning, I'm like sitting down, I'm like trying to write this down. I'm like, okay, this is what it looks like. Okay, what is this woman wearing? Oh, okay, she's wearing a sage green, kind of like a pressed linen uniform. Okay, it's a uniform. It's a uniform. It's not just like an outfit. Okay, and then okay, so it's a uniform. So like, what type of environment is this that she would be wearing a uniform? And okay, she's like performing these acts of magic. Like, what is it? Like, what is this magic system? I'm like, I didn't even realize it was called the magic system at this point. Like, it was my friend who works in publishing who like told me that's a nomenclature. Like, she was like, when I was trying to tell her, okay, well, let me tell you like how like the world. She's like, okay, so you mean the magic system? Like, tell me about the magic system. I'm like, oh, okay, there's a term for this. But like at this point, I didn't even realize that. I'm like just like writing it down. I'm like, oh, okay, like she's doing this. Okay, well, like what does this mean? Like, how does that work? Like, what's like the physics behind it? And what is she doing in this building? And I'm like, what are we doing in this building? Like, I'm observing this, and I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm observing this. Okay, so there must be a character here that I'm observing from. Like, who's observing Cassidy? There must be a person here. Oh, it's Tori. Tori's observing this. So that's how the entire first draft, like that's how like the entire series skeleton was built, where these things were happening. And I was like, oh, okay, this is what these people are doing. This is what they look like. This is what the environment looks like. Oh, okay, they're in this location. I have no idea how they got from this location, from that location, but let's start documenting what's happening in this location. And that's how like the entire series skeleton was built. That's how all of draft 1 Call of Matter was done. Like draft 2 was really about like bringing like the people through. Like I mentioned the point here where I'm like, oh, okay, well now they're in this location. So how do they get from this location to this location? That's the part I need to construct starting in draft 2, where I'm like, okay, how do we get from scene 6 to scene 7? And draft 3 is then like polishing to be like, does this make sense? Like grammar, like sentence structure, line level for my edit, not like copy editor, but like I do my own line edit. And draft 3 is the one that went to beta readers. Draft 4 is like dev edits, where basically I consolidated all the feedback, identified the key patterns, like analyzed their feedback, identified key patterns from like all 8 beta readers, and then did honestly like nearly 800 hours of dev edits, where I actually like rewrote most of the book. Sounds interesting because it's kind of like, well, you rewrote most of the book. Yeah, but like to be honest, there were some load-bearing scenes and moments within Call of Matter. And it's funny because like that's the stuff that hasn't changed at all, right? So I might adapt, okay, how does this one sentence sound? Or I might change specific detail, but like the bones are absolutely the same. It's actually kind of like all like the in-between stuff that brings us from these key load-bearing moments, these like specific kind of these like really like kind of these keystone moments. It's how we get through the entire arc, like those constructed in between chapters are actually the ones that I completely rewrote. To just like improve the pacing, improve the efficiency of how do we get to these key moments. But the key moments have always been the same because those were the ones that broadcasted to me as is. Like the Aristasis story, the Call of Matter story fell into my head with these key specific moments, and those have like never changed to all 5 drafts. They will never change. Like that's for me, that's like fact. Like the world came to me this way and I can't reconstruct it a different way. Like it wouldn't be the same story anymore. It wouldn't be the right story anymore. It wouldn't fit the characters anymore. It wouldn't fit the world anymore. It happened this way and it has to continue happening this way. But either way, so then the development edited version went to my Big 5 editor. He went and did like the line level copy edits. That's draft 5. That's come back to me. That's what I'm working on right now. Like basically adjudicating the 5th draft after it's come back from my editor. Like while I was writing Call of Matter, I also was receiving, like I was also like transcribing what was coming into my head for book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, book 6, book 7. Like all will, at random points in time, various scenes will start like, sounds weird, but various scenes kind of start playing in my mind while I'm just doing various things like unloading the dishwasher, making the bed, or cooking at the gym. Oh my God, I have so many moments that come to me while I'm at the gym. It's always like these moments where I'm like doing, like I'm like busy doing something else, but my brain is just like I told you, my favorite activity is daydreaming. My brain's just like wandering. And that's how, like that's why my first drafts are like, it feels like raw footage. Like it's not really like a full story. I mean, there is a start, middle, and an end, but it feels like raw footage, like raw filmed footage, like disjointed, because I don't like my first drafts are completely not chronological. Like it really just depends on like which scenes fall into my head when they do, and I write them. And usually like it's usually after I finish like documenting the scene as fast as I can as it's like playing in my head. Like I try to like document every like detail that I can see, and then comes the act of like slotting it. Like, okay, at what moment of the book is this happening? And sometimes I'm like, I have a scene where I'm like, oh, actually, I thought this was going to be in book 2, but actually it's going to be in book, it makes more sense in book 3. And of course, the POVs change sometimes in terms of what the scene is. And sometimes also like their narration style changes. So sometimes it's like a narrative aside. So it's like much closer to the character. It's like you're like very close to the interiority. But sometimes it's like more distant, right? It's all my writing's always going to be first person. And I think this, I wonder why actually, because if you think about based on how the stuff falls into how should I say it? It's because I don't experience these scenes from like, oh, I'm watching other people do things. I'm always seeing them from a POV of one specific character, but at the same time, there are some scenes, like I mean, it's hardly a spoiler. In Call of Matter, there's a scene that takes place underwater. And in the scene, I see it from third-party perspective. I see it play out. Like I can kind of, in some moments, I can see it from first-person perspective, but in some moments, I can see it from third-person perspective. And I think those are the moments where when I'm transcribing, and maybe you'll see it in my writing, in my prose, those are the moments where it feels more distant. You're a bit further away from the narrator, and you're experiencing more like the world, like the scenery. You're like seeing what this person is seeing. But sometimes you're like, I experience the scene really close to the narrator. I'm like in their head, in their interiority. And that's actually why you will feel this difference also in my prose when I'm writing. Sometimes you feel really close to the interiority and sometimes you're like outside of it. And it's because the scene came, like the broadcast came into my head differently and I just transcribe it exactly the way that it comes into my head. So, yeah, like I just thought that was so fascinating. It really explained like why, because I mean, I knew that every writer writes differently. Every artist does their art differently, right? And I knew that some authors write like really from start to end chronologically. I'm one of those that writes absolutely not that way. I write like completely scattered and it's kind of like afterwards putting all the puzzle pieces together and then like actively constructing the connecting puzzle pieces to bring it all together. That's just literally the way my brain works. And it actually explains a lot about why my first draft was able to be completed so quickly. You remember I was working full-time as a corporate exec and the first draft was done. You remember like 7.5 months, I did 3 drafts. Like 7.5 months, I went to beta readers. So like the first draft like took maybe like 2 months, 3 months tops while working full-time because it wasn't really active brain work. Like it was just like documenting what I was seeing in my head. And that is like way more, that's like really way lower cognitive load than like actively writing and constructing. Like this is why dev edits took me so long because it was like, oh my God, I need to like actively construct now. Like how do I get us from 6 scene and 6-7 faster? Oh wait, maybe I actually can cut scene 7 and just bring scene 5 to scene 7 in this really much faster, more efficient way. So like it was much more like active construction versus first draft is just like, I'm just gonna like document what I see in my head. Like it kind of just feels like describing to someone an experience. For me, it just kind of felt like meeting up with a friend and being like, how did your vacation go? And like me like telling them how my vacation went. For me, that's what writing first draft feels like. Oh, okay, I'm seeing this stuff. Okay, it looks like this. They're in this kind of room. This is what these people are wearing. This is how they're feeling. This is what they're, like even dialogue. I'm like, this is what they're saying. Okay, well, this person said this person said, like, and it's really a matter of like capturing as accurately as possible what I'm seeing. It's super fascinating. And I just like, please tell me in the comments, what do you see? Like, what do your thoughts look like? I'm genuinely really curious. Like I said, I've asked everyone in my own private life because I've seen really full range that we're talking like painting to like floating in space, static visual to all the way to the end of the spectrum where I am full K, like 4K, HD, multisensory movie. I can't even say movie because a movie isn't multisensory. It's it's really happening in this moment in my life. Like I can reach for it. I can taste it. I can hear the crunch of the apple, like the full spectrum. And I'm really curious to hear, where do you lie? Anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. Hit the subscribe button if you want to stay tuned on my journey to publishing my first novel and my first series. Thanks, until next time.